Rain hit the arcade roof hard enough to rattle the iron gutters, and Griffin's hand was already on the wet stone balustrade when she heard the chamber doors slam behind her. She did not turn immediately. She stood with her shoulders lifted under rain-cold wool, breath fast, the skin at her throat jumping with each pulse. The mockery from the dais was still in her ears, not as words now, but as texture. Scraped laughter, a chair leg dragged for emphasis, the soft slap of a docket packet on polished wood. Inside, they had called her unsteady. Outside, her boots were planted flat and braced. Griffin. Rowan's voice carried differently out here, stripped of chamber resonance. No clerk, no gavel, no gallery to hear how he shaped a sentence. She turned then. Water had darkened the edges of his collar. He had removed the presiding sash and left it draped over one forearm like a surrendered banner. "You adjourned for this?" she asked. The words came sharper than she intended, not from strategy but from a jaw that had not unclenched since Ivan read out the claim. "I adjourned because procedure was being used as a blade," he said, "and because you walked out under it." Her laugh cracked once and died. That sounded almost kind. "It wasn't kind," he said, stepping closer, then stopping. "It was necessary." He lifted his hand as if to catch her wrist, not quickly, not with force, with the hesitation of someone who knows exactly what he should not do and feels the pull anyway. His fingers hovered an inch from her sleeve seam. She felt that near contact as clearly as touch. Her body answered it with a sharp intake, a heat she hated in this moment because it arrived without asking whether the room was safe. Rowan saw it. His own breath shifted. "I want you," he said, the words low and rough in the rain noise. "Not your vote, not your debt." Griffin stared at him, anger and want crossing in her chest like crossed ropes under strain. "Then you chose a ruined day to say it." "I know." "If you take one step now," she said, voice steadying as she spoke, "if I let you take it, they will call that consent under pressure. They'll say the warden leaned and the house head yielded and the matter is settled." His hand dropped to his side. "I know." Neither moved. Water drummed. Somewhere beyond the arch, a bell clanged from harbor fog and vanished. Footsteps slapped through the corridor behind Rowan. Mara, Griffin's younger sister, appeared first, hair half loosened, face pale with urgency, and behind her came old Nessa with a leather ledger hugged to her chest like a rescued child. "Don't you dare settle anything out here," Mara snapped before she had fully reached them. Nessa found it. Griffin turned, heart kicking harder for a different reason now. Old Nessa lifted the ledger. "Seal witness line is blank," she said. "The debt compact fails charter form. We go back in." The rain kept falling. Griffin looked once at Rowan, saw in his face the same recognition she felt. Desire had not disappeared, but now it had somewhere rightful to stand, and that somewhere was not this arcade. The chamber bell rang to recall witnesses. Griffin took the ledger. "Then we go back in." Wind had not always lived inside Windrider House, but after the storm year it seemed to move through every room. In 2022, the gale came out of the east with a pressure drop that made old hinges sing. By dawn, 2 barges bearing Windrider markings had gone under at the outer channel break. Griffin remembered the report as symbols first, grief second, hull numbers crossed out in black ink on a slate board, cargo columns struck, debt totals carried down. The board stood in the counting room next to a shelf of scale weights and smelled faintly of chalk dust and lamp oil. Old Nessa had set a cup of bitter tea by Griffin's elbow and tapped the debt line with a blunt fingernail. "Read every mark," she said. "Never trust what someone summarizes for you." Griffin had been young enough that her braid still snagged when she turned too quickly, old enough that no one shielded her from numbers anymore. "Principal," she read, mouth dry, 48,000 crowns. "Again," Nessa said, 48,000 crowns. Good. If you can't say a number while your stomach drops, you can't carry a house. Rain had found cracks in the upper lintel. One drop hit the same place on the sill at a steady pace. Her younger sister Mara had stood at the doorway then, listening with her fists tucked in her sleeves. Too young for formal standing in council, but old enough to hear what ruin sounded like. The debt compact arrived that afternoon, carried by a runner who left mud on the threshold and apology in his posture. Nessa had broken the wax with the back of a butter knife, flattened the sheet, and read in full. Claim right language sat in the middle like a trap under moss. If default persisted and charter terms held, a creditor could move against house seat and trade berth inside a filing window after loss. After loss, how long? Nessa asked without looking up. Griffin scanned the clause. 18 months. Say it like you'll remember it while someone is shouting over you. 18 months. Nessa nodded once. Good. We'll remember faster than they hope. Nessa did not hide fear, which made her more frightening and more trustworthy at once. She taught by repetition of action, not slogans. Check seal, check witness, check date, check charter copy. Hold both pages to the same light. During that season, she kept the old charter binder on the table beside supper bowls so Griffin would flip through while eating. Mara mocked the smell of mildew and then learned page tabs by color anyway. Why does witness matter if both houses signed? Griffin asked one night as wind pressed soot back down the chimney. Because the charter says it matters, Nessa replied. Not custom, not courtesy, law. She opened to a thin page where the ink had browned with age and pointed to the line in the old script. Seal defects void claim right assertion when witness requirement is unmet. It has to be read exactly when challenged. If the line is spoken wrong in chamber, someone will pretend not to hear. Mara leaned in over the table, hair falling forward. Then we don't speak it wrong. Griffin looked from one to the other and nodded. The house smelled of fish glue and wet rope, and broth thick with barley. Outside, harbor chains knocked against pilings with each surge. Inside, the three of them learned to survive by reading. Years moved, not gently, but forward. Cargo substitutions, lean seasons, dock bargains done at dawn. Old crews kept loyal by partial shares rather than promises. The debt sat with them like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. It got mentioned when storms gathered, when invoices came short, when anyone asked about expansion and Griffin said no. By 2024, autumn brought the conclave and the chamber doors polished for public session. Griffin had slept poorly the night before and rose before sunrise anyway. Mara, her younger sister and household anchor, helped pin her cloak and fasten the house clasp at her shoulder. Nessa watched from a chair with her cane across her knees. Remember where you stand, Nessa said. Dais rail, left side for househeads under dispute order, Griffin answered. Remember what to do if they rush. Ask clerk to read chamber rules aloud. Mara held out a strip of ribbon for Griffin's braid. And if someone performs concern while trying to pin you, she said softly, walk. Griffin met her eyes. You always assume the worst. Mara tied the ribbon tight. I assume patterns. At the chamber approach, crowd noise swelled from street vendors, petitioners, and rival factors pretending disinterest. Ivan stood near the side entrance with a folded docket packet in hand, expression trimmed into courtly patience. He bowed as Griffin passed, exactly low enough to advertise confidence, not deference. Househead, he said. Factor, Griffin replied. Inside, the chamber had that particular smell of waxed wood and old arguments. Rules were posted by the entrance in black lettering on whiteboard. Presiding warden may adjourn session at discretion to preserve order and charter compliance. Griffin read the line as habit, not omen, then took her place. Rowan presided at center dais, shoulders square, expression contained. He met Griffin's glance only briefly before calling opening order. His gavel taps were restrained, almost gentle, but the room responded to them like snapped rope. Ivan rose when recognized and moved to enforce claim right over Windrider House. He read from his packet with practiced cadence, emphasizing dates and liabilities, flattening context. Storm loss in 2022, debt principal 48,000 crowns, obligations unmet in aggregate, filing submitted within 18 months. He laid the packet down. Relief sought. Transfer of voting seat and birth control pending debt execution. The gallery murmured. Griffin felt Mara's stare from the side bench even before she looked. Mara had positioned herself near the aisle, where she could move quickly if needed. Nessa, slower but present, sat farther back, chin high. Househead response, Rowan said. Griffin stepped to the rail. I dispute legality of claim right filing due to charter form defects, she said. Ivan gave a small smile without humor. Interesting that defect appears only now, when enforcement arrives. It appears now because you rushed then, Griffin said. Laughter flickered from a knot of factors. Ivan spread his hands. If the Windrider accounts are as disciplined as her temper, perhaps we should all be worried. The gallery laughed louder. Griffin's ears burned. She looked to Rowan, expecting him to strike for order. He did once, but too late. The insult had landed and settled like grit under skin. Present proof, Rowan said. We requested archive poll this morning, Griffin answered, hating the thinness she heard in her own voice. The ledger. No proof at rail, Ivan cut in, then no defect in law. That is not procedure, Griffin said. Procedure, Ivan replied, tapping his docket, is what is filed. Mara rose halfway from her bench, jaw tight. Nessa touched her sleeve, a restraining hand. Griffin saw both motions and understood something ugly and familiar. If she stayed in this exact frame another minute, they would grind her into the shape they wanted and call it due process. She stepped back from the rail. Househead? Rowan said. Griffin unfastened her house clasp, closed her fist around it, and turned toward the exit. Gasps, whispers, one loud scoff from near the grain seats. She walked anyway, each step audible in the chamber hush that followed, until the door opened and the rain sound swallowed the room. Behind her, she heard Rowan's voice carry through the half-open door. Session adjourned. The clerk repeated it at full volume. By posted chamber rule, adjournment stands at presiding discretion. No one could claim they had not heard. Outside, the arcade gave her only partial shelter. Wind drove spray under the arches. Griffin braced both palms on wet stone and bent forward slightly, breathing through nausea and fury in equal measure. She did not cry. She hated that this still surprised people when it happened. Footsteps approached quickly, then slowed. Rowan stopped at the threshold as if an invisible line had been drawn and only then crossed it. He had left the chamber in a hurry. One cuff remained unbuttoned. He looked less like a title and more like a man with too many constraints and one intention that had finally broken surface. I shouldn't have let that continue, he said. You did let it, Griffin shot back. You tapped once after he made the room laugh. He accepted the strike without flinching. Yes. Rain bounced off the stone floor in bright pinpricks. Griffin wanted to keep talking because talking felt like control, and silence felt like surrender. But her body had begun to register proximity instead. Rowan was close enough that she could smell wet wool and iron from the damp railing he had brushed. You came to fix optics? She asked, to look compassionate where no one can hear? I came because you walked out under attack, and I sat a chair while it happened. That chair is your worship, isn't it? No. She gave him a hard look. You had one job in there. I still do. He moved a fraction nearer. She did not step back yet. His hand rose, then hovered near her wrist. Every nerve along her forearm flared as if he had touched bare skin. She hated that reaction for how honest it was. I want you, he said, and the sentence sounded like it had been held behind his teeth for months. Not your vote, not your debt, not a claim filed by anyone. Her laugh came out raw. You picked an excellent minute for that confession. I picked the minute after you left a room built to corner you. You are that room, she said. His face changed at that. The flinch, small but real. Then hear this from the man and not the chair. If claim right against your house stood, and if I used it to reach you, that would be coercion dressed as law. For a breath, they stood without speaking. Rain thudded overhead. Griffin felt the drag between desire and self-protection as physical force, chest pulling in opposite directions. She saw his mouth, the line of rain on his jaw, the pulse low in his neck. She wanted to close the distance and despised the timing so much she could taste metal. If we cross this line now, she said, keeping her voice precise to keep it steady, they will call it consent under pressure. They will say the warden followed and I agreed, because my seat depended on him. I know. You cannot touch me here. I won't. The promise settled between them, harsh and needed. He stepped back first. That mattered more than either of them said. Running footsteps broke the moment. Mara, her younger sister, and the one who always spotted danger first, came around the inner bend of the arcade breathing hard, one hand on the wall to balance on slick stone. She took in the spacing between them at a glance and nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if confirming a hazard had been avoided. Nessa's coming, she said. With the old green ledger. Griffin straightened. You found it? Mara shook rain from her sleeve. Found and read. Witness line blank on the debt seal copy. Charter says that voids claim right. Old Nessa arrived more slowly, cane clicking, ledger hugged under her coat. Her cheeks were wet from rain and effort. Her eyes were bright as struck flint. Not copy, Nessa corrected between breaths. Original house ledger with the compact sheet sewn in. His filing used a transcript. This has the seal box itself. She opened the ledger against the balustrade. The page was thick, fiber raised. The seal impression smudged at one edge where wax had pressed unevenly. Signature lines were filled. Witness line sat empty. Griffin's anger sharpened into function. If he claims clerical omission? He can claim whatever he likes, Nessa said. Charter text controls. Read from the old binder page, not memory. Rowan had gone still in a different way now. Not with desire, with recognition of legal leverage. Bring it back to chamber, he said. Same dais, same audience. I'll call record in full. Griffin turned to him. You'll do more than call. You'll hold the line when he tries to talk over witness text. I will. Mara touched Griffin's elbow, firm and grounding. You're shaking. I'm furious. Good. Use that for enunciation. The corner of Griffin's mouth twitched despite herself. Then she closed the ledger, drew a breath, and walked toward the chamber doors again with Mara at her side, and Nessa just behind. The return down that corridor felt longer than the exit had. Stone corridors remember humiliation. Every torch bracket looked familiar in the wrong way. Griffin heard voices gathering inside, the particular rustle of people preparing to see whether she would come back bowed or armed. At the threshold, the clerk stood with reopening slate in hand. Rowan resumed the chair only after Griffin entered. He did not call for order until she was at the rail. The sequence mattered. Session reconvened, Rowan said. House head has submitted evidentiary challenge under charter form compliance. Ivan rose immediately, smile sharpened. Objection to reopen challenge absent timely archive certification. Griffin set the green ledger on the rail with both hands so the sound carried. Not archive. House original. Kept in continuous possession by Windrider House under charter allowance. Nessa stepped forward when summoned as memory witness. The chamber quieted. Even those who disliked her knew better than to interrupt when she stood with the old binder. Rowan nodded to the clerk. Read posted rule on presiding authority and evidentiary admission. The clerk read clearly. Presiding warden may adjourn at discretion to preserve order and charter compliance. Upon reconvening, material evidence directly responsive to claims raised in session may be admitted. Rowan inclined his head. Admitted. Ivan lifted his docket packet. Then let the record show this is theatrical delay. Let the record show, Griffin replied, that your filing was rushed and you knew defect risk. Ivan's eyes narrowed. Accusation. Your docket entry, she said, turning to the clerk. Read notation under filing date. The clerk searched pages and found the line. File ahead of witness confirmation to preserve deadline position. Signed by Ivan Dorr. A rustle swept the gallery like wind through reeds. Ivan spoke quickly. Standard notation to ensure jurisdiction, not admission of defect. Then explain why witness line is blank, Griffin said. Nessa opened the binder to the charter page and handed it to Griffin. Griffin read aloud, each syllable clipped clean. Claim right assertion is void where required seal witness is unmet. She lifted the debt compact page for the chamber to see. Required witness count by charter. 1. Present witnesses on this compact. None in witness line. Ivan tried to interject. Rowan struck once with the gavel. You will have reply after reading concludes. Griffin kept reading. Seal signatures of parties are not substitute for witness attestation under this clause. Nessa spoke then, voice steady though her hand trembled slightly on the cane. I oversaw this compact signing. Runner left before witness arrived due to storm closure. We flagged it that night. We preserved original accordingly. Ivan gave a short laugh. Convenient memory. Mara stood from the side bench before anyone called her. Not memory alone, she said. House teaching records include account drill entries where Nessa instructed us to mark missing witness on this specific compact. Same week as signing. Ivan turned toward her with contempt he forgot to hide. You were a child. Mara met him squarely. I could read. The room made a different sound now, not mockery, more like collective recalculation. Griffin felt it shift around her, the narrative cracking where proof entered. Rowan addressed Ivan. Reply. Ivan cleared his throat. Even if witness line lacked mark at signing, subsequent performance by both houses should cure technical defect. Charter text does not contain cure language, Rowan said. It contains reasonableness. It contains words, Rowan replied. Read words, not wishes. A few people in the gallery laughed, but this time not at Griffin. Ivan's color rose. Griffin leaned in slightly at the rail. You asked to strip a seat, a berth, and a vote on a filing you noted as rushed. You mocked challenge before seeing original. You do not get to call this technical now. Rowan nodded to the clerk. Prepare vote on censure for procedural abuse and bad faith filing posture. Ivan snapped. This is retaliation. No, Rowan said. This is consequence. Votes were taken by House marker boards lifted in sequence. Griffin watched Rose tilt toward censure. Not unanimous, never that, but clear. The clerk counted, confirmed, and announced censure entered. Claim right motion voided for seal defect under charter. Griffin did not smile. Relief came as a loosening in the sternum, almost painful after long constriction. Mara exhaled audibly at her side. Nessa lowered herself back onto her bench and let her cane rest across both palms, eyes closed for a beat before opening again. Rowan looked to Griffin. Formality returned to his posture, but something gentler sat beneath it. House status restored with full voting authority. The chamber heard him. The same audience that had watched her walk out now watched her stand restored at the rail she had left. She inclined her head, not in submission, in acknowledgement. Recorded. The censure entry was read. Ivan gathered his packet too quickly, dropping one page, snatching it up with a jerking motion that drew no sympathy. He requested leave. Rowan granted it without flourish. Ivan exited to a corridor suddenly less eager to court him. When chamber noise resumed, it did so around Griffin rather than over her. A factor who had laughed earlier avoided her eyes. Another gave a stiff nod. Neither mattered much. What mattered was the floor under her boots and the sentence on record spoken in open air. By the time formal agenda wound down, evening had pressed amber light through the high windows. Petition piles thinned. The public benches emptied in waves. Mara remained near the side aisle, vigilant even while exhausted. Nessa sat very still, one hand on the ledger cover, thumb stroking the cracked edge of leather as if saying goodbye to an old instrument. Rowan called closing ritual. By chamber custom, disputes concluded this session are sealed by acknowledgement of standing and renunciation of improper leverage. He descended from the dais and stood on floor level, no height advantage. The room quieted again, those who remained sensing weight. Griffin Windrider, he said, formal and clear, using her full name in a chamber that tracked every syllable. Your house stands in full right. I publicly renounce any personal claim connected to your debt, your vote, your birth, or my office. He paused, then continued without looking away. After adjournment, outside this chamber and without condition, I ask whether you would consider private courtship. A murmur moved through the room and stopped when Griffin lifted one hand. She took a breath, aware of Mara's eyes on her profile, Nessa's stillness behind, the wood grain under her fingertips. Yes, she said. I will begin that with you unbound. Rowan bowed once. Then we begin unbound. He turned back to the dais and struck final adjournment. The clerk repeated it. Session closed. Only after that did Griffin move. Mara, her younger sister and anchor through the worst of the day, reached her first and gripped her forearm hard enough to hurt slightly, which Griffin accepted as love in its practical form. You answered in there, Mara whispered. I wanted no confusion. Mara's mouth quirked. No one can accuse you of that. Nessa stood slowly with help from the rail. Griffin took the ledger from her and offered an arm. Nessa waved it off, then accepted anyway after a beat. You did exactly what we trained, Nessa said as they walked toward the exit. You read line for line and made them listen. Griffin glanced at her. You're the one who remembered which binder page. Nessa snorted. I remember too much. It's time I retire before memory becomes performance. Mara stopped. You mean truly retire? Nessa nodded. Tonight I name you successor in house role, Griffin. Public enough has happened. Private naming can still be clean. Griffin's throat tightened. Nessa. Don't argue with elders when they are finally being sensible. Nessa said, You have the seat. Keep it. Keep your sister close. Keep debt in sight even after this victory. Voided claim is not paid principal. The reminder landed without sting because it was true. 48,000 crowns remains, Griffin said. Good, Nessa replied. Say it plainly, never as fog. They stepped into the evening arcade where rain had gentled to mist. Rowan waited by a pillar, no longer in presiding coat, hands empty. He did not approach until Nessa and Mara had nodded assent. I owe both of you thanks, he said to Mara and Nessa first. Mara crossed her arms. You owe consistent conduct. Thanks can come later. To his credit, Rowan almost smiled. Accepted. Nessa gave him a long, assessing look. You stepped back when asked. I will again, if needed. See that you do. Nessa moved off with Mara toward the carriage lane. Mara looked back once, pointed 2 fingers at her own eyes, then at Rowan in a wordless warning that made Griffin nearly laugh despite fatigue. Left under the arch, Griffin and Rowan stood with a safer distance now, neither pretending the day had emptied them. I meant what I said, he began. So did I. Then we start small, he said. A walk by the dry docks when weather allows. No council rooms, no closed doors. Public enough to prevent invention, private enough for honesty, Griffin said. Exactly. She nodded. Tomorrow at dusk. He inclined his head. Tomorrow. No kiss, no reaching, just agreement shaped carefully and placed where both could carry it. The next morning smelled of tar, wet oak, and tide mud. Griffin stood on the slipway before sunrise with Mara, both wrapped in work coats. Workers moved around them with measured urgency, replacing cracked planks, caulking seams, tallying salvage against future sailings. Debt did not care about romance or chamber victories. It moved by schedules and cargo. Griffin marked projected routes on a chalk slate while Mara called out load capacities from memory. They revised twice before the numbers felt honest. Reduced risk lanes first. Shared freight with allied houses second. Repair reserve held back no matter who pressed for faster returns. People will think censure means we're flush, Mara said, scraping an old line off the slate with her thumb. People think what helps them negotiate, Griffin replied. We'll keep saying the principle. Mara grinned without mirth. 48,000 crowns. Exactly. Old Nessa arrived later than usual with no ledger under her arm for the first time Griffin could remember. Instead, she carried a wrapped bundle of house keys and a carved bone tally marker worn smooth at the edges. She handed the bundle to Griffin. Successor naming stands. I'm done with dawn shifts. You'll still advise, Griffin said. When asked, and from a chair, Nessa replied. I prefer tea to ladders now. Mara leaned in to kiss Nessa's cheek. You earned both. Nessa eyed the slipway. Also earned is caution. Debt pressure makes fools of brilliant people. Don't be brilliant, be consistent. Griffin tucked the keys into her coat pocket and felt their weight against her ribs. It was lighter than she expected and heavier than anything she had carried. By dusk, rain had cleared. Griffin met Rowan near the dry docks as agreed. The place was quiet except for chain clinks and water-licking pilings below. They walked side by side with space between shoulders and hands visible, deliberate in a town that watched. We need boundaries stated, Griffin said, as they turned along the old crane track. Yes. In chamber, you are warden, I am househead. No private signal, no preferential timing, no softened procedural edge. Agreed. Outside chamber, if either of us says stop, it stops. Agreed. She looked at him. You accept your power narrowed by oath? I accept it, he said. I prefer it named rather than assumed. He glanced toward her but did not reach. I also need to say this. I did desire you before today, and that desire made me slow where I should have been sharp in session. I won't make that mistake again. Griffin considered him for several steps. That is the first useful apology I've heard in months. I can offer useless ones if you miss them. She laughed, surprised by it. Don't. They stopped at the end of the dock where a weathered mooring post rose from cracked planks. Griffin rested one palm on the post, feeling old grooves worn by years of rope strain. The harbor had gone quiet enough that she could hear individual drip points from rigging. I wanted to kiss you in that arcade, she said quietly, eyes on the water. I know. I wanted to because I wanted to, and because I wanted to stop feeling publicly helpless. Those are not the same thing. No, he said. They're not. She turned to face him fully. Thank you for stepping back. His answer came without delay. Thank you for naming the line. They stood in evening air that smelled of kelp and rust and cooling stone. This time the pause between them felt chosen, not trapped. Rowan lifted his hand slowly, waited. Griffin nodded once. He touched only her knuckles, brief and warm, then let go. The following conclave session came soon enough to test whether promises held when pressure returned. Griffin took her seat as househead without challenge. Ivan attended under censure shadow, quieter now, his packet thinner. his confidence trimmed down to caution. He did not meet Griffin's eyes. She did not seek his. Rowan presided with stricter cadence. When a factor tried to interrupt a witness, he struck order at once. When another attempted to smuggle inference as fact, he required source line before allowing continuation. No one could accuse him of indulgence this time. Mara watched from the bench and, for the first time in months, leaned back against the wood rather than forward at constant readiness. Nessa did not attend. Retirement meant not sitting in stale air for other people's theatrics unless essential. She sent a note through Mara with no signatures, just one line in blunt script. Speak clearly, then eat supper. Griffin smiled when she read it, folded it, and tucked it into her sleeve. After adjournment, Rowan and Griffin walked out with the ordinary crowd rather than waiting for private corridors. They stopped by a street stall and shared hot chestnuts from a paper twist, talking about cargo insurance rates and whether early frost might cut river schedules. People passed them. Some stared. Most moved on. Normalcy, she discovered, had texture. Rough paper warming palms, salt on roasted shells. A conversation that did not need to carry the weight of either catastrophe or confession. Days later, at Windrider House, Nessa held a small supper by the kitchen hearth and insisted on no speeches. She sat in her preferred chair, feet on a low stool, blanket over knees, and accepted a bowl from Mara with grave satisfaction. You both look less hunted, she observed. Speak for yourself, Mara said. I still expect ambush from doorframes. Useful skill, Nessa replied. Keep it for real danger, not every shadow. Griffin stirred stew and looked around the room that had held debt dread, training drills, and too little sleep for too long. The slate board still hung by the pantry door. She had rewritten the top line that morning. Principal unchanged. Repayment schedule active. Berth secure. No triumphal words. Only work. Mara set down her spoon. Do you trust him? Griffin considered before answering. I trust what he has done under scrutiny. Trust beyond that gets earned in small pieces. Nessa nodded approval. Good answer. Mara glanced between them. And if counsel starts whispering again? Let them whisper, Griffin said. We'll keep conduct clean and outcomes cleaner. Nessa lifted her bowl in a tiny toast. To clean outcomes. They ate. Outside, wind moved through the eaves, but the windows held. On a clear night near season's turn, Griffin met Rowan again at the harbor edge where repaired hulls knocked softly against their moorings. Lantern light drew gold lines on black water. The air had bite, and both wore gloves, practical and unromantic. They walked until the quay ended at a narrow point overlooking the channel where the storm had taken the two barges in 2022. Griffin stopped there and looked out a long while before speaking. I used to think survival meant never showing where it hurt, she said. Rowan waited. Turns out survival also means letting the right people see it and not letting the wrong people use it. He nodded. That sounds like a househead. That sounds like Nessa, Griffin said, and smiled. He smiled back. Then she trained you well? She took off one glove and pressed her bare palm to the cold stone cap at the quay edge. It grounded her better than speeches ever had. Rowan did not move closer until she turned toward him and tipped her chin. Yes. This kiss, when it came, was unhurried, brief, and entirely theirs. When they parted, neither looked around to see who might have witnessed it. The point was not secrecy now. The point was choice. They walked back toward town with their shoulders almost touching, then easy with the contact. Behind them, harbor sounds settled into familiar rhythm. Chain, water, distant gull, nothing urgent. Some beginnings are strongest when they arrive after a public no. At the next dawn tide, Griffin stood on the same slipway as workers cast off for a routine run. Mara checked lashings with habitual sharpness. Nessa watched from a chair near the shed door, wrapped in wool and drinking tea she claimed was too weak. Rowan passed on the street above on his way to chamber, saw them, and raised 2 fingers in greeting without breaking stride. Griffin lifted a hand back, then turned to the crew and called final checks. Rope thudded onto deck. A gull hopped along the rail and complained at everyone equally. The boat pushed free, bow cutting a clean line through the water. She listened until the oarlocks found their rhythm and the sound of departure stopped scraping at old fear. Then she tucked her hands into her coat, felt the keys in one pocket and the smooth bone tally in the other, and smiled at nothing in particular as wind moved across the harbor and kept going.